Let me tell you something about liars. The good ones, the really good ones, they don't oversell it. They stay calm. They keep it simple. They give you just enough rope to think you're the one holding it. This woman, she was not a good liar. She walked into my courtroom on a Tuesday afternoon like she was arriving at a charity gala where she was the guest of honor. Head high, heels clicking. That little half-smile people wear when they think they've already won, and the trial is just a formality. Like a victory lap before the race has even started. She was suing her former business partner, a quiet, nervous-looking woman named Diane, for $11,000, claimed Diane had stolen from their joint event planning business. Stolen, that was the word she used, not mismanaged, not disagreed over finances. Stolen like Diane had cracked a safe in the dead of night and fled to Cancun, and for about 45 seconds, she had the room. 45 seconds. That's how long it took me to know, not suspect, not wonder, know that this woman was the architect of her own fraud, and she'd walked into the one courtroom in America where that particular performance was going to get her absolutely nowhere. I've sat on the bench for decades. I've seen grifters, con artists, deadbeat dads, delusional landlords, and every flavor of audacity the human ego can produce, and I can smell a lie before they even open the gate. This one, it didn't even require a nose. She brought the stench with her. Now, let me set the stage for you, because what I noticed in the first 30 seconds told me more than either of their opening statements ever would. Karen Malloy, plaintiff, 5'6", give or take, immaculate manicure, the kind of blouse you buy when you want people to think you're successful, but you're financing it on a credit card with a 19% APR. She had her documents fanned out in front of her like a poker hand, tabbed, color-coded, little sticky notes poking out the sides like flags on a used car lot. Now, to an untrained eye, that looks like preparation. It looks like diligence. It looks like a woman who has receipts to me. It looked like theater, because here's the thing people don't understand about documentation. When someone brings that much paper to a case worth $11,000, they're not organized. They're building a wall. They want you so buried in paper that you never look up long enough to notice the story doesn't make sense. And then there was Diane, the defendant. Quiet, reserved, a woman who clearly did not enjoy being in a courtroom. Her folder had maybe 6 pages in it, bank statements, a few printed emails. She wasn't putting on a show. She wasn't performing. She was just there, standing in front of me with the weary posture of a woman who had been bulldozed by a louder personality for years and had finally stopped trying to outrun it. Now, I don't form judgments based on aesthetics. I want to be clear about that. I've seen well-dressed plaintiffs who were dead right and nervous defendants who were guilty as sin. But I do read energy. And the energy in that room was telling me a very clear story. One person came here to perform. The other came here to survive. Karen opened her mouth, and within 2 sentences, I had the entire playbook. Your Honor, I trusted this woman. I brought her into my business, a business I built from the ground up, and she repaid that trust by siphoning money out of our joint account for her own personal use. Siphoning. Listen to the language. Not withdrew, not used. Siphoning. That's a word you choose when you want to paint someone as a criminal without actually having to prove a crime. It's emotional vocabulary. It's designed to make you feel something before you think anything. And she said, my business. Did you catch that? Not our business. Not the business. A business she allegedly shared 50-50 with Diane for 3 years. But when it was time to stand in front of me and tell her story, Diane's name got erased from the marquee real fast. I let her finish. I let her lay the whole thing out. The stolen funds, the broken trust, the emotional devastation of being betrayed by a friend. And then I turned to Diane and asked one question. Was this a 50-50 partnership? And Diane said, yes, Your Honor. I put in half the startup capital. I have the bank records right there. That flicker, that tiny little muscle contractions around the eyes, most people wouldn't catch it. I've been catching it for 30 years. That was the face of a woman who just heard the first brick get pulled out of the wall she'd spent all morning building. And we hadn't even gotten to the evidence yet. Now, I already knew the trajectory of this case by the 5-minute mark. But here's something people don't understand about what I do. The job isn't just about knowing who's lying. The job is about letting the liar prove it for you on the record, in their own words, with their own mouth. So I let Karen keep talking. She told me Diane had made unauthorized withdrawals from the business account totaling over $11,000 across a 6-month period. She presented her spreadsheet. Oh, she was proud of that spreadsheet. Highlighted, annotated, little arrows connecting dates to amounts like she was presenting a thesis at a forensic accounting seminar. The problem? The spreadsheet was hers. She made it. It wasn't a bank-generated document. It wasn't a third-party audit. It was Karen Malloy's personal reconstruction of what she claimed happened, printed on her home inkjet, presented as if it were the Rosetta Stone of financial crime. I looked at that spreadsheet. Then I looked at her face, and I knew exactly how this was going to end. But I wasn't ready to end it yet because she wasn't done digging. I asked her, Mrs. Malloy, you said these were unauthorized withdrawals. Did Diane have signatory authority on the account? And Karen said, and I want you to hear this, because this is where the performance started to crack. She said, well, yes. Technically, her name was on the account, but there was an understanding that neither of us would withdraw funds without discussing it first. Technically. There's one of my favorite words in the English language when it comes out of a litigant's mouth. Technically means legally, yes, but I'd like you to ignore that. Technically is the trapdoor in every con artist's argument. The second they say technically, they've conceded the legal point and they're asking you to rule on feelings instead. I don't rule on feelings. I never have. So I pushed a little harder. I said, was there a written operating agreement? Anything that stipulated withdrawal limits or required mutual approval? Karen blinked. And in that blink was a novel. We didn't think we needed one. We were friends. Friends. They were friends. So there was no operating agreement, no bylaws, no written rules governing a jointly held bank account with both names on it. And she was standing in my courtroom calling lawful withdrawals from a shared account theft. Now I could have ended it right there. I had enough. But I wanted one more thing. I wanted to see what Diane's 6 pages had to say. I said, Diane, show me what you've got. And what Diane had was worth more than Karen's entire color-coded empire, 6 pages. That's all Diane brought. 6 pages that dismantled a 6-month accusation in under 2 minutes. The bank statements showed every withdrawal Diane had made, every single one. And next to them, because Diane, bless her quiet, methodical soul, had printed the corresponding records, were the receipts, vendor payments, venue deposits, catering invoices, floral arrangements. Every dollar Diane had withdrawn from that account had gone directly back into the business. Every single dollar. She wasn't siphoning, she was working. She was the one actually running the operational side of this so-called partnership, while Karen was apparently busy making spreadsheets and shopping for courtroom blazers. Now, here's where it gets delicious. I turned back to Karen and I said, Mrs. Malloy, I'm looking at these vendor receipts. Every withdrawal your partner made corresponds to a legitimate business expense. Can you explain to me what specifically was stolen? And do you know what Karen did? She did what every bad liar does when the floor disappears beneath them. She pivoted. Well, Your Honor, even if some of the money went to vendors, there were other expenses that. I stopped her. Right there, mid-sentence. Don't do that. Don't say even if. You came in here and told me this woman stole from you. You used the word siphoned. You presented a handmade spreadsheet as evidence of fraud, and now you're standing here telling me even if the withdrawals were legitimate, there were other things. What other things? Show me, right now. Silence. Magnificent, deafening silence, because there was nothing else. There were no other things. The spreadsheet was the whole act, and the act was over, but I wasn't finished, because I had noticed something else in Diane's bank statements, something Karen clearly hoped I wouldn't see. There were withdrawals on that account that didn't match any of Diane's vendor receipts. Withdrawals that Diane hadn't made. Withdrawals that came from the other signatory on the account, Karen Malloy. Over the same 6-month period, Karen accused Diane of looting the business. Karen herself had withdrawn over $8,000 from the joint account. No vendor receipts, no business invoices, retail purchases, ATM cash withdrawals at locations nowhere near their business, a spa, a department store, a pet boutique. She accused her partner of stealing $11,000 while she herself was withdrawing $8,000 to buy dog sweaters and hot stone massages. I set the paper down. I took off my glasses. I do that when I want someone to understand that what I'm about to say is not a suggestion, it's a verdict. And I looked at Karen Malloy and I said, "You didn't come here because you were robbed. You came here because your partner stopped letting you treat a joint account like your personal piggy bank, and you thought if you got loud enough and organized enough and threw enough paper at me, you were the one with your hand in the cookie jar. Your case is dismissed. And you should be thanking your stars that your partner didn't countersue you for the $8,000 you can't account for. Though, if she were standing here asking me right now, I'd be inclined to hear her out. You know what Karen Malloy's real crime was? It wasn't the $8,000. It wasn't even the fraudulent lawsuit. It was the certainty. She walked into my courtroom certain she was the smartest person in the room. Certain her spreadsheet would blind me. Certain her vocabulary, siphoned, unauthorized, betrayal would do the heavy lifting that the facts couldn't. Certain that if she performed outrage convincingly enough, I would mistake volume for truth. And that is the single most dangerous thing a person can bring into a courtroom. Not a bad case, not insufficient evidence. Certainty, the unshakable belief that you are so right, so righteous, so clearly the victim, that you never once stop to examine whether your own story holds water. I've sat behind that bench for more years than most of these litigants have been alive. And if there's one pattern that holds, one thread that connects every liar, every fraud, every person who thought they could waltz in and sell me a fairy tale, it's this: they never think they're the villain. Every single one of them has a story where they're the hero, where they're the one who was wronged, where the universe conspired against them, and they're just here to set the record straight. They rehearse it in the car on the way over. They refine it in the hallway. They sell it to their friends and their family and their social media followers until they believe it so deeply that when they finally stand in front of someone who doesn't buy it, someone who looks at the paper instead of the performance, their entire world cracks. That's not justice. That's gravity. Lies are heavy, and eventually no amount of colored tabs and highlighted margins can keep them in the air. Karen Malloy came to take $11,000 from the only honest person in her life. She left with nothing. And Diane, quiet, patient, 6 pages in a folder, Diane, didn't need a blazer or a speech or a color-coded war chest to win. She just needed the truth. Funny how that works.